You know, you hear the phrase posse comitatus, and typically we think of the Posse Comitatus Act, which is an act that limits the power of the federal government to use the federal military to enact domestic policy. Think about that. We don't want a military coming into our communities. We don't want soldiers. We don't want martial law. Okay, that's why we have the Posse Comitatus Act. But what does Posse Comitatus really mean? It literally means the power of the county. The sheriff of the county would call a posse. We've all seen the Westerns, right? You have the sheriff who was elected, not appointed by some kind of law enforcement bureaucracy, not appointed by some distant federal government that is as far distant geographically as the British government was geographically from the American colonies at the time of the Revolutionary War. Not as distant from us in terms of political goals as the British were from the Americans at the time of the Revolutionary War. But they did not want to have a standing military. They didn't want to have a military that was going to come in and enforce policy in the area. So law enforcement was centered around one elected official and some of his permanent deputies. But when something big would happen, they would deputize people and they would create a posse to keep the peace in the county. Okay, that was the plan. Not that we would have a permanent standing army. And you understand, I've mentioned this before. If you look at law enforcement in the United States, there are only 3 countries that have a larger military than the law enforcement military that we have in this country. And one of them is the United States military. So we have 2 of the largest 4 militaries in the world when you look at it that way. We have the real military and we have the military of law enforcement and the military of the federal bureaucracy, where we have even the Department of Education creating SWAT teams and coming after people for delinquent student loans. Now, against this backdrop, against the backdrop of things that we've seen at the Bundy Ranch, at Oregon, and the many other cases that we've talked about, here's one in Utah. Piute County, Utah. The second smallest county by population in Utah is making a lot of noise in the Western land movement these days. This is a story out of from Fox 13 out of Utah. Say longtime rancher Stanton Gleave is at the center of a conflict that includes the county sheriff on one side, the U.S. Forest Service on the other. He wore his cowboy hat. He held up a pocket constitution as he spoke with the rural caucus of the Utah State Legislature on February the 12th. He said, "These federal people have no right to be here if you follow the Constitution." And the Piute County Sheriff, Marty Gleave, said, "We're not taking no more cuts on the mountain. I'll deputize every man, woman, and child in the county to stop what's going on." Now, we're going to tell you what's going on out west when we come back. Now, I was just talking about this story that Rob Jacobson showed me about this sheriff out in Utah who is upset with the Forest Service, just like others have been upset with the BLM, these different federal government agencies that are essentially militarizing the law enforcement in these areas, exceeding their authority, talking about how he's going to deputize every single man, woman, and child in the county if necessary to stop what they're doing to them. Understand that is the authority of the sheriff to conscript able-bodied men to assist in keeping the peace and to underscore the power of the community. That's what Posse Comitatus means. We had the Posse Comitatus Act that said the federal government will not be allowed to use the military to enact federal policies domestically, okay? Let's go back to this report, again, from Utah, the Deseret News, back in June of 2014. This is another sheriff, Garfield County Sheriff Danny Perkins. He's talking about the frustrations that he has out there working with the BLM. He said, "We have absolutely no relationship with the BLM. We've tried. They seem to want to do their own thing. They do not respect the authority of the sheriff at all. It's hard for them to accept that the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer in this county." He says, "We've got many examples of abuse, and this, listen, militarization of the government agencies is a real problem," said Garfield County Commissioner Leland Pollock, who also traveled to Washington, D.C. to talk about this. He says, "If this guy does something that blows up, we're all going to be on TV. This is a scary scenario, especially in rural areas." Well, the guy he's referring to is, guess who? Special Agent in Charge Dan Love. Remember that name from the Bundy Ranch standoff? Dan Love was the guy who was in charge. And they're saying that they accused him in that county in Utah of spreading a culture of dismissiveness and arrogance towards his coworkers. They say, and this is a quote from Pollock, the county commissioner, he has created a situation where they thumb their noses at us. And this starts at the top. Starts at the top, okay? And they're talking about the anxiety over armed federal regulatory agencies is not unique to Utah. They say Representative Chris Stewart from Utah points out incidences that have happened in Los Angeles, as well as to mining operations all the way up to Alaska. He unveiled a legislation that aimed to demilitarize federal regulatory agencies, prevent them from having armed SWAT teams. He says, I understand they need to be able to protect themselves, but this goes way, way beyond that. Let's go back to the charges against Cliven Bundy when he was arrested. The New American had an article at the time, and I've been meaning to talk about this for quite some time, but so many other pieces of news come in. Cliven Bundy was charged with multiple counts of conspiracy. But what about when the court charges the BLM with conspiracy? You've got the sheriff in Clark County, who was the sheriff when this standoff was going on, talking about how the BLM lied to him. He said that in February. And then there's this situation from Chief Judge Robert C. Jones, a federal court, who charged officials of the BLM with criminal conduct engaging in a decades-long conspiracy against another Nevada rancher. Those conspiracies go unheeded, just as the crimes by Hillary Clinton go unheeded, as the FBI is manic to set up a surveillance of all iPhones. Join us tonight, 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, for the InfoWars Nightly News.
I want more candy. I want more video games. Lie.
And it's that type of behavior that spurred me to do the research to develop a true nutraceutical formula that was designed to smooth out and help children focus. All of our children are hit with modern mind control. Television, music, fast food, GMOs, sugars, you name it. Young humans have not yet developed their nervous system and are being hammered daily by globalist concoctions. It's no wonder they can't focus and calm down, and then are put on dangerous psychotropic drugs. Working with my team, we set out to find the best formula with the highest quality ingredients that children would actually like and take. We worked with the leading manufacturer in nutritional supplements that are safe for children to bring you the most affordable and powerful calming formula out there. Introducing Child Ease with herbs and calming extracts like chamomile and lemon balm and essential nutrients that taste great. Obtain your Child Ease today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's Child Ease exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com.